UK economy. On Wednesday, new figures showed that the unemployment rate had dropped to 7.1%. That exceeded expectations. It's back to levels last seen in 2009. On Tuesday, the IMF revised its growth forecast upwards to 2.4%, saying that Britain would grow faster this year than any other country in Europe. Mind you, that's not saying much. Earlier this month, it was revealed that inflation, as measured by the Consumer Prices Index, fell to 2% in December. Bank of England hit its target at last. It's the first time it's been at or below the government target since late 2009. And today, the government has released data showing that most workers saw a real increase in their take-home pay in the last financial year. That's the one ending April 2013. It's interesting they drilled down to that particular year. Ministers say the take-home pay rose by at least 2.5% once tax cuts have been taken into account. For some, it rose as much as 4.8%. In the same period, CPI inflation was 2.4%. Labour say the figures are highly selective. They're only for 1 year and don't take into account changes to benefits. They say that, quote, families are on average £891 worse off as a result of tax and benefit changes since 2010.
Britain led the Industrial Revolution and dominated the European and world economy during the 19th century. It was the major innovator in machinery, such as steam engines, for pumps, factories, railway locomotives and steamships, textile equipment, and tool making. It invented the railway system and built much of the equipment used by other nations. As well, it was a leader in international and domestic banking, entrepreneurship, and trade. It built a global British empire. After 1840, it abandoned mercantilism and practiced free trade, with no tariffs, quotas, or restrictions. Between 1870 and 2000, economic output per head of population in Britain rose by 500%, generating a significant rise in living standards. However, from the late 19th century onwards, Britain experienced a relative economic decline as other nations, such as Germany and the United States, caught up. In 1870, Britain's output per head was the second highest in the world after Australia. By 1914, it was the fourth highest. In 1950, British output per head was still 30% ahead of the 6 founding members of the EEC, but within 50 years it had been taken over by many European and several Asian nations.
Some of the UK's major resources are coal, petroleum, natural gas, iron ore, lead, zinc, tin, and gold. Their major economic sectors are the industrial, service, agriculture, and allied industries. The largest contributing sector to the UK economy is the service industry. It makes up about 77% of the economy. The largest contributing service industries are financial and banking, healthcare, retail, creativity, and tourism. The current GDP is $2.435 trillion US, with a GDP per capita of just over $38,000 US. Since the economic downturn of 2008, the GDP has clearly struggled. In 2009, it went as low as negative 2.5%. However, at the end of 2013, the GDP was up 0.7% and grew by nearly 2% throughout the year, which is amazing considering that the GDP barely grew by 1% in the last 2 years. The unemployment rate is currently at 7.2% after the number of people out of work fell by $125,000 to 2.34 million in the last 3 months of 2013. The inflation rate is currently at 1.9%, which is a decrease from 2% last month. This is the first time that the inflation rate has dropped below the Bank of England's target rate of 2% in more than 4 years. The top 5 exported goods are nuclear reactors, mineral fuels, cars, electrical machinery, and pharmaceutical products. The top 5 exported countries are the United States, Germany, Netherlands, France, and the Irish Republic. The top 5 imported countries are Germany, China, the Netherlands, United States, and France. The UK is a member of many preferential trade agreements. Since 1973, they have been a member of the European Union, an economic and political unity of 28 member states that are primarily located in Europe. Through the EU, they are part of a single market that supports competition of the goods from participating countries. They are also members of the World Trade Organization, which began in 1895 to supervise and liberalize international trade. The WTO currently oversees 60 different agreements, such as the Agreement of Agriculture, which gives domestic support, market access, and export subsidies to members of the WTO. The UK is also represented in the WTO under the EU, which is a member as well. They also have a preferential trade agreement with the other members of the Commonwealth, a set of over 50 countries, with the majority of those being former members of the British Empire. Foreign direct investments are very important to the UK economy. The United Kingdom remains Europe's top destination for FDI projects and had an increased market share in Ernst & Young's yearly attractiveness report of the country. In 2012, they had about 700 FDI projects, with an average of about 650 in the past 10 years. The most important FDI sectors are business services, software, machinery and equipment, financial intermediation, and other transportation services. The major sources of these FDIs are the United States, Germany, the UK, France, and Switzerland. The United States has 39% of the FDIs in the UK and is the US's favored country to invest in within Europe. The United Kingdom uses the British pound sterling, commonly called the pound, as its currency. After the Bretton Woods system dissolved, the pound began to use a floating exchange rate from August 1971 onward. This is when a currency's value is allowed to fluctuate based on the foreign exchange market. The US dollar uses the system as well. The current exchange rate for one British pound is $1.67 in the United States.
According to the UK Trade and Development Policy Report, the United Kingdom's aim is to strive for prosperity and a sense of secureness through open and fair markets. They want benefits for the United Kingdom and the EU. The financial crisis would only be furthered by protectionist policies. That is why the UK is moving away from subsidies, anti-dumping, tariff and non-tariff barriers. The immediate focus of policies is to overcome barriers to trade to move towards recovery of the financial crisis. The UK wishes for free trade agreements, multilateral agreements, and economic partnership agreements with areas like the Caribbean, Africa, and countries in the Pacific. Other rules and standards could help support openness, such as intellectual property rights.
The UK has a very expansive and elaborate economy. An open economy lets them thrive in the global market off imports and exports, therefore allowing them to increase their own wealth by exporting and importing based on their own comparative advantages. Britain needs to export goods and services to finance imports of the products that they do not produce domestically, otherwise known as producing the roundabout way. There is a significant improvement in economic welfare if countries specialize in the products in which they have a comparative advantage in and then trade with other nations. Today, international trade is at the heart of the global economy and is responsible for much of the development and prosperity of the modern industrialized world. Trade is also likely to increase employment, given that employment is closely related to production. It means that more people will be employed in the export sector, and through the multiplier effect, more jobs and more money will be created across the British economy as a whole. Producing a select range of goods and services for the domestic and export markets means that the UK can produce at higher volumes, which provides further cost benefits in terms of economies of scale. The increases in competition lowers world prices, which will provide benefits to their consumers by raising the purchasing power of their own income and lead to a rise in consumer surplus. The quality of goods and services coming out of Britain increases as competition encourages innovation, design, and the application of new technologies. Additionally, trade breaks down domestic monopolies, which will be forced to face competition from more efficient foreign firms. The UK has established itself as one of the leading economic powers in the world, but their status and prosperity could not have been made possible without their international engagement.
Economists argue over two main differences in debating the best fix to the economy, either an aggressive monetary policy or more fiscal stimulus. While these are two divided views, they can both argue that the main issue lies in the supply side of the economy. Then, the greater issue may be resistance to come to accept new changes, such as technology-driven reductions in employment. However, by resisting these changes, the UK loses their competitive advantage in the world marketplace, thus trapping them in a world of self-limiting productivity. While the economic trade-offs are very rich, the UK must begin to allow such new policies to fight their way back to the top.
Its economic recovery since the financial crisis has been really weak. miserably weak. It's not been like the Eurozone where it's real doom and gloom and carnage and everything falling to pieces, but the UK just bumps along the bottom. And what we've seen happen in the first quarter is it's bumped a little bit into positive growth, but it's still very close to that triple-dip recession.
Well, there was all this talk about austerity. The IMF even jumped on the bandwagon and said all of Europe needed austerity. This was a couple of years ago when the European crisis was starting to get going at that time, and the UK was also a part of that as well. Fast forward to today, the IMF now says for the UK, wait, don't do the austerity. We want you to stop that and start spending money. Do you find that odd?
Well, the IMF changed its tune a bit. And I think it's natural that this has happened because a couple of years ago, Britain had a gigantic budget deficit. It was close to 10% of the economy. So it's quite natural that people were saying, oh my God, we've got to do something about this. We've got to get this deficit down. And so they've tried very hard to do that. And it really hasn't worked. We've seen this miserable economic growth. So people are going back the other way a little bit. But you should listen to what the IMF's saying. They're not saying go out and spend government money like there's no tomorrow. They're saying spend money on infrastructure. They're saying the government should invest in transport, in schools, whatever else, to get more growth in the future. And that's slightly different from the just spend fiscal stimulus type of argument.
Prior to the financial crisis and prior to the European crisis, let's say the UK economy was here. The crisis occurred, it became here. Where are we?
We are maybe here.
Are we halfway back?
Yeah, well, it's about that.